So the word for Japan in Japanese is not Japan. It's nihon or nippon. And those are both written the same way in kanji. It's the sun origin because, if you're in China or something looking out over the ocean, that country out there in the land of the rising sun, where the sun originates, that's Japan. For my first several years learning Japanese, I wasn't totally sure why they have these two different ways of saying it, this nihon or nippon. But you will not have that problem because I will explain it to you. Before I do, I want you to check out this video where this interviewer is interviewing a guy about zatsudan, which is like small talk. And you'll notice that one of them says nipponjin. So if you add jin to the end, it just means person, so Japanese person. And the other one says nihonjin. And just watch that and try to catch which one of them is saying which reading.
で、そもそもなんですけど、日本人って雑談は下手なんですか？
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので。
So I'll come back to the video and I'll explain everything that they're saying, but let's just focus in on the one part where she says
日本人って、
the interviewer says 日本人って so she says 日本人 with the po sound, and then the guy being interviewed says
日本人がよくやるのは
日本人がよくやるのは so he says 日本人 I showed this to Rei, my wife, and I was like, you think that she says 日本人because she's like an interviewer, and so she's kind of like an announcer type thing because they do that? And she kind of was like, I don't think so. And the reason I thought that is because at NHK, which is like the big public broadcasting company in Japan, they officially refer to Japan as Nippon in their newscasts and stuff like that. But that's not because it's the right way to do it. So we have a lesson on this on Native Shark. So I'll just read the summary of that because it's going to explain it a lot more succinctly than I could when recording a video at 5 in the morning for you. When to use Nippon versus Nihon. So I'll just read the summary. Sometimes people pronounce Nihon, that's hard to read out loud because sometimes people pronounce the kanji for Japan as Nihon and other times as Nippon. Generally speaking, you can stick to using Nihon, but there are cases in which Nippon might be a better choice. I pretty much always say Nihon, and so does Rei. She thinks that Nippon sounds kind of gross, and I don't know why she thinks that. It's just her personal preference. So that also comes into play with this type of thing. Yeah, in 1934, the Ministry of Education decided to standardize the pronunciation as Nippon, but this decision was not adopted by the government. The thing is, a lot of proper nouns do use one or the other. If you know the major airlines in Japan, there's Japan Airlines, that's Nihon Koku, and then there's All Nippon Airlines, which is usually called ANA in Japanese, or we call ANA in English. One uses Nihon and one uses Nippon. And there's an area in Tokyo, like we said in this lesson right here, called Shinbashi, which is Shinbashi. And there's an area in Tokyo, for example, called Nihonbashi, which is using Nihon. And there's an area with the same name in kanji in Osaka, but they call it Nipponbashi. And so that's, the example we had for in this lesson. We said an article.
日本橋は西の秋葉原とも呼ばれていて、毎日サブカルファンや海外からの観光客で賑わっています。
日本橋は西の秋葉原とも呼ばれていて、毎日サブカルファンや海外からの観光客で賑わっています。
The one time I might say Nippon instead of Nihon, I mean, unless I'm saying a proper noun that would need to have Nippon, is if you're like, let's look at this next example. Another time you might opt to use Nippon is when praising Japan in some way, such as cheering for its team in an international sporting event. You're watching a soccer match and cheering for the Japanese national team.
日本チャチャチャ日本チャチャチャ
日本チャチャチャ日本チャチャチャ
Yeah, and here cha-cha-cha is just supposed to be people clapping. Presumably this is done because Nippon has the ring of being a more classic and older pronunciation of Nihon. Anyway, let's take a closer look at that conversation that we saw, where one of them was saying Nipponjin and one of them was saying Nihonjin. First, the interviewer, she says...
で、そもそもなんですけど、日本人って雑談は下手なんですか？
First she says, で The reason she says de is just because she's like continuing the conversation. It's kind of like saying so in English. You might notice that a lot of non-native speakers of Japanese, when they're speaking, will start a sentence with like soshite because they want to say and then. In spoken Japanese, people don't say soshite all that often, but it's pretty often to start a sentence with de, like she does here, when you're sort of just like continuing the conversation and saying so or and then. She continues with
で、そもそもなんですけど、
そもそもですけど. So そもそも just means in the first place. And then des is the copula, so it means like is. Kedo means something like but. So そもそもですけど is literally in the first place, but this but is just, it's not, doesn't mean but. We have a lesson on that in Native Shark too. It's just a content marker. It's just indicating that there's more that she's going to say coming after this. Taking that beginning of the sentence, de, そもそもですけど is just
で、そもそもなんですけど、
so in the first place, and then she's going to continue, and she says, 日本人って、
日本人って、
Nipponjin, here we know is Japanese people, and then te is acting as a topic marker, like you would with wa. As for Japanese people, and she says,
日本人って雑談は、
zatsudan wa, and zatsudan is like small talk. Wa is topic marking particle again, and she sort of pauses, and then she says,
日本人って雑談は、下手なんですか？
下手なんですか? And because heta means not good at. It's the opposite of being jozu. It's just poor at, not skilled at. And then she says, nan desu ka? Ka is the question marking particle. So she adds that at the end of her sentence because she's asking a question in formal language. Des is just a copula. And the reason she includes nan is because she's asking for a deeper explanation as to like what's the deal with zatsudan, because she's talking to an expert about making small talk effectively. So like the underlying nuance is like, so maybe Japanese people aren't good at it, so she includes that nan. It'll take a while to get used to that, because the sentence makes sense without nan, right? She could just say heta desu ka, but she's adding a bit of a different nuance by including that nan in there. The nuance that, maybe this guy thinks that Japanese people are not good at it, or that he's got more to say about that topic, and she wants an explanation for it. Okay, and then he says,
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので、
日本人がよくやるのは, so 日本人, Japanese people again, only this time he says 日本人 instead of 日本人.
Nihonjin ga yoku yaru no wa Nihonjin ga yoku yaru no wa Nihonjin ga yoku yaru no wa
Nihonjin, and so Japanese people, ga is the subject marking particle. I'm not going to get into that here. Yoku is often, yaru is to do, and then no wa. So wa is topic marking particle, right? And no is making what came before it into a noun phrase. So like Nihonjin ga yoku yaru, what Japanese people often do. We say that in English, right? Like what Japanese people often do is. So in that phrase, what Japanese people often do is a noun phrase. And we do that with the word what, but they can do that with this particle no in Japanese. It just turns that whole thing into a noun.
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので。
He says high context, which is high context. And then he sort of pauses and says, oh no, because he's like trying to think of what to say. It's like, and then na nihongo, that na is just, you can think of it as attaching to high context, as like making it into a not adjective. And then nihongo is Japanese. And, you don't say nippongo ever. It's always the ho one, not the po.
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので。
And then de, like in, like, because speaking Japanese in, and then he says kaiwa, which is conversation. Xiao is to do together. And then node is like because, and he continues after that and has a big long answer. And I'm not gonna, this video would be very long if we broke down his whole answer. But, translating that whole thing, you might say that he's saying Japanese people often speak in high context Japanese with one another. So, and then he continues. Okay, hearing that, let's listen again and just see if you can catch what they're saying.
で、そもそもなんですけど、日本人って雑談は下手なんですか？
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので。
Did you catch that? Did you also catch the aizushi? So in Japanese, they often make these noises when someone else is talking, which sort of indicates that you are listening to them. You can hear him saying things like hi and stuff. Almost like interrupting her, but he's not interrupting her. He's just indicating that he's listening. Listen again for when he does that.
で、そもそもなんですけど、日本人って雑談は下手なんですか？
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので、
You'll get really good at doing that also in Japanese, the more you speak it. And then if you're like me, you'll come back to the US or something and visit or wherever you're from and visit your family. And you'll start saying like, yeah, and things while they're talking. And then they'll stop talking because they think you want to interrupt them to say something. But actually you're just trying to do aizuchi without thinking about it. And yeah, in Japanese, a person knows you're not trying to interrupt them. You're just indicating that you're listening. But yeah, it doesn't work like that in English so much.
で、そもそもなんですけど、日本人って雑談は下手なんですか？
日本人がよくやるのはハイコンテクストな日本語で会話し合うので。
Anyway, to summarize, when in doubt, just say nihon. But if it's a proper noun that uses nippon, then say nippon. And if you work for NHK and you're a TV announcer, you should probably use nippon. Try not to overthink it when you hear one person use one or the other. It might just be their personal preference. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments. If I went too fast or too slow, just let me know. I'll include a link to that lesson I showed and a link to the video that we watched in the description. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate you giving your time to me.
この番組はフューチャーラーニングメソッドネイティブシャークがお送りしました。